Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. If you would like to have your track reviewed in this video, please feel free to hop on over to the Discord server and submit your track to the submissions channel. There's rules there, which will help you also get your file into this place if it be selected, which is a random process that I do at the moment of doing these videos. I have no idea what these songs sound like until I play them here before you now. As well, I accept any given track whatsoever. I have no way to check what's in them. I have the mod people who are there to make sure nothing illegal is being posted and the things are named properly, and they do wonderful work. Thank you guys. But for the most part, I have no idea what happens or what they sound like until we play them. So, for example, this track is D5 by Korper. All right, that was pretty fun. So this reminds me a lot of older FL Studio demo files, like from ye old 3 and 4 ages, like when they were initially demonstrating things like the automation clips and stuff like that. That was there was a lot of this sort of like slow build stuff that they did, and it actually pretty inspired me a lot in terms of like beat making at the time. And this just kind of shines through here, and I think mostly it's just that there were similar inspirations to their styles as well as this. This has that kind of lo-fi hip-hop thing going on, which is well and good. The only criticism I have pretty much at all is just that this lead is just like a dB too loud. Either that or the drums could be a little bit more present. Like, the lead does kind of push at things, which is fine, because none of this is designed to be pumping, right? This is pretty much what total respect to dynamic range looks like when you're basically putting the power in the hands of the listener. And that's sort of really what loudness and the loudness wars are about. As like, when we consider, there's the obvious, like when we consider the listener to be a DJ that's putting our stuff back to back with other things, that generally we want our things to, like, you know, stack up and be that way kind of thing. But when an individual person is just listening to the random music choices in random environments, like, they're not always they're not like metering their stuff. They're not gain staging their stuff to make sure it's all like the same level of loudness. Some of them are, but they're probably producers. And to everyone else, like, there's just different levels for different things. And to basically put it in their hands means that you give them the dynamic range so that they can bring it lower or quieter still and make it feel their kind of comfort. And then at that point, it's not about the literal level that is a thing. It's about relative to everything else. Relative, and like even in a mastering sense. I mean, it's still the same way when you're mixing stuff for the super louds. It's just that how hard you crush it after the fact and how much that relativity matters. This probably looked a lot like this. Like, this could probably be unmastered, but this also probably didn't look all that different before and after mastering in terms of the levels of the instruments, just because that's what it pretty well sounds like. And moral of the story is that I love the hell out of this fluty motif. Like, this synth is awesome. Which is fine. It's perfect. Nothing wrong with it. It has a good evolution, a good intro, and then it wears a bit thin, especially in this moment. Did I mean that? I meant this moment. Yeah. Right before the beat comes in, because the beat does come in, and it's just a little bit under that thing, and then it kind of fills up a lot more space than it usually does. And then when the full force comes in, the mix makes sense. Like, that balance makes sense. Although I still think it's like a dB too loud. And I would actually recommend slightly more variation in things like this. Like, this filter in and out effect that's happening could have been interspersed in between here as fill elements. And that would have helped the longevity of this moment. Because, like, right around here, it got to be a bit much. And then there was, like, a hint of a modulation. And then it kind of went back to what it was doing. And that, it could have been more of that kind of modulation. Or it could have been the same thing, but just more of this effect. In fact, this effect could have happened during this part and then just kind of trailed off this amount. You know, there's options. But the thing I'm saying is that, like, this texture that this was got a little long in the tooth by the time it got around here. That might change depending on how loud the leads are, if that is a change you end up making. Or don't make. Like, this is fine track. Like, however this is, whatever, it's dope. Just in future works when you're doing similar works. For the most part, that's also what I intend when I'm giving anybody any advice, is that, like, for sure some people are wanting to change the track that we're looking at, but for the most part, this is for, like, the next time you do things, to keep in mind on some stuff. Especially since, and not in the case of this track, but when we talk about a whole lot of like the sampling, intersample picking, and that kind of thing that comes up in every track. Like, a lot of those solutions are to retroactively do things that you did, like, way in the beginning of a track. And it's just a lot easier to just, next time you do it, try and be more cognizant, if it's a thing you care about. But this was good. This was very well done. Good track. Good job, Korper with a K. All right, next up is Fusekit with Moon Castle. Let's see what this is. Ooh, isn't that a bit brighter? Wow, look at these sausages. Are we about to see some of that intersample peaking? Let's find out. So parts of this were cool. A lot of it was a lot more though. So I really dug this progression eventually, like where it got to. Like, of the things that could be salvaged, if you balance this up right, this part would sound pretty awesome. I dig this kind of like halftime break stuff. That's just what beat I like. So I see where this can go. What this suffers from a lot of is a desire to make everything feel really in your face. And I don't mean like, obviously I like loud stuff too, but you're making every individual element as loud as every other one. And there needs to be some layering and level there. And sort of what I mean by that, like let's do a quick visual here, because this comes up a bunch. So if I just do that, right? Right, y'all are detached, aren't you? Cool. All right, I'll actually just stay there. Something inconsequential. So things on the tracks will have planes in their level, right? So it's like the loudest elements are going to be like cool. Here's like the kick and the snare will be like up there, and then you'll have other elements that will be kind of loud, but they won't be as loud, and they kind of exist on their plane. And then like how loud the primary elements are based on what the primary elements in your song are. Kicks and snares would be the biggest ones, and the most kinds of loud electronic music. It doesn't have to be. This is just what it is for stuff I do. And then like, there's the bass, and then that's pretty loud. Then the lead might also be that kind of loud. And then you're going to start adding background elements. And while they are going to be cool, you want them to sound cool, they don't need to be, and probably shouldn't be as loud as the things that are the main elements. They generally just should be there so that you know that they're there, but their job is to support stuff. And sure, you want to like every once in a while focus on them because they're cool, come back and pull them off on whatever. And you can do all the nice and fun layering on there, whatever. But basically the ultimate idea for the take from this is that every new thing you add to something should probably be less than whatever the main element that it's supporting. And this doesn't just have to be a levels consideration. This could also be a spectral consideration, where it's like, cool, we have a main bass already. We've got subs, we've got this other junk. So like all we want is like the higher frequency tinge of this new guy. And that's a lot less level to add than like the whole thing. And there's a lot of whole thing in this track. Unminimize. Yeah. Strategy. Fwamp. Cool. Yeah. So there's a lot going on in here that is all individually great, but there's also like so many spectral overlapping, so much spectral overlapping that doesn't need to necessarily happen, because like the element that's there is already handled by something that's already happening. And especially if you're just gonna be playing the same notes together, like they could just EQ out the level, and that'll help out your balance a lot. I don't see. I mean, this sub choice is interesting. It sounds away, and the 2-tier ones do feel better, but they lack definition, especially with what really high notes you're choosing. And then you go really low down there, and it has less level. It's kind of weird. It's also kind of weird is how much what seems to be MP3 samples in here, because this is a WAV file. It's definitely a WAV file. So that being zero. I mean, that's just filtering, perhaps, I guess. I mean, that's what bit crushing looks like, so I probably should be looking over here. But like this, that's a pretty big, obviously, that cutoff. And there's a lot of that present. And I'm not 100% sure the process that got you there. Someone from the previous video where I brought up this, and they're also in their WAV files that had this strangely MP3-based cutoff. Oh boy, like actually now I'm zooming all out here. It's kind of, you can almost see a pitch change. So like sampling is fun, I'm not against it. It's just interesting to see that it exists here. But part of the problem with sampling MP3s is that this happens. Or I guess this could have been a WAV file that you just pitch down far enough that was the result. But like, there's still stuff you can do to like kind of alleviate this. Not that it necessarily matter, because again, well, when you do put this up as an MP3 in a streaming format, it'll look like this anyway. Moral of the story of the previous guy was that they mentioned that they referenced the streaming content, right? They referenced the YouTube playback and the SoundCloud playback, but not the downloaded file, which meant that they just thought that there was their big ass roll off on top as like a choice. And while that's technically true, it's not because of that choice. It's because of this other thing that we don't really have a choice about, which is the MP3 junk. But it's also what it looks like when sampled stuff is manipulated in particular ways. And how evenly distributed this one is makes me feel like, is this maybe like a correction kit or something? Or did you like sample and render an MP3 and put that back in your song? Because maybe don't. But yeah, it's fascinating all the stuff you can see. Look over here. This is. It could have been just what bit crushing does. Like, there's not like bad or good either way. It's just something I can see. Anyway, overall, this track, it really needs some tweaks on the mix, and it's mostly about sort of letting your leads be leads and letting the background be the background. Here comes the next track, Wrath by Outcry. Ooh, more sausage. Also, it peaked a lot. That last one did. Oh boy, it did. Here we go with this one. Wow, out the gate. All right, we're in for something. okay. Well, that was dope all the way through. Like, I don't even care that it clips. I generally don't care that it clips. It's just that most people tend to assume that their stuff doesn't when they do things inside their DAWs in certain ways without doing certain other things that we talk about all the time, like oversampling and whatever. But for the most part, you know, it does. But this certainly does. And it is, like, it's up there. But damn. I dig the random symbology thrown in on some stuff. Not even sure that was one of them, but, like, you know, here's one. And then there's that guy again. Then there it is. Yeah, that was art. It was good stuff. Let's see. Also thought was fun was some of these fill dudes. You know, like it's funny how like it really would strip it down and look at it this way. It feels like it's not that complicated, but like it definitely is. And like this guy, oh, you see that? See what that looks? You see what that's going on there? That looks an awful lot like harmony sampling to me. Of course, I could just be seeing that in everything because it's just how I roll. That was the end. But there was some those sounds also just like were good. Like these dudes. The choice of tonality and rhythm is what sells this track. And it's true for most of these, like, because it's true that like this especially this main guy, this not a terribly difficult thing to do, but it's just the application of the rhythm and then switching out for the other elements, how minimal they might be. Like this is a perfect example of it right here. That's just a big old like context contrast switch. So you can see it happening where it's like it's thin and then it's open and then it's open more, and like certain things the switching out just like a kit would, a drum kit. This kind of thing people often refer to it as being not very musical, and that's just honestly because it is not very musical. It is, however, extremely rhythmic, and that's the genre sort of etymology of this stuff is like drum circles. And that's why the switch ups of like the primary instruments are just switching around and being the contrast, and the kit works so well. And it's also why it works so well being loud as balls. Anyway, excellent job, Outcry with Wrath. Next one, Infowler, Sharks. More fatness. I like me some fatness. I like how thin this is, and then it's not. This will be interesting. Wow Town. with the tape stop. That was dope. That was pretty instantly dope. This was great. And then all of a sudden this. And like, that's still the best groove. That's the best part of it there. And that's the best part of it here. Like, this part was fun. And it didn't exactly wear, but this should have been like the rough intro to more of this, in my opinion, my own opinion, because obviously this is very well thought out and very pieced and very arranged and tight. This is so very a tight mix. I honestly prefer how this one hits to the previous track. And actually, I want to talk about the previous track's drum hits. Because what happens when you do crush things too hard like that is that you do lose your hit. You just are going to lose your hit. And you can sort of account for that if you get clever with the mixing and trying to get... I have no idea how you did it with this one here, but the way I do it is with the automating release times and whatever. I keep talking about that all the time. It's basically an effective way to get that snap back in there without having to force things through an unwelcome threshold if you don't want to. And the result is this kind of more wider, rounder set. Versus your guy, which had that high frequency smoosh effect to it. Now, here's the other thing, is that just might have been what you wanted to do. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And I wanted to tell a funny story about how when I was originally trying to learn how to mix metal, I was using a reference that was basically Korn. I was using Korn's kick drum sound. And eventually, I finally figured out that I wasn't actually doing that. I wasn't trying to do Korn's kick sound. I was trying to get the bass sound, the bass guitar sound, because Fieldy, that guy, he waxed the strings with his fingernails, and I thought that was the kick, because that's what it sounds like. So when I was trying to mix kicks, my reference wasn't actually correct. And that's why the mix kept being weird. That's why I could never really pull off, because I didn't really know what I was trying to like make a layer out of. And I feel like a lot of people who are referencing just willy-nilly anything, like they can get to some conclusions about what they're listening to. You might notice a lot of kick drum samples have hats in them, and that's because a whole generation of people doing that assumed a part of the kick sound that it felt so harsh and metallic is because there's a hat in there, and it imparted its harsh and metallic nature in there, and now that's just part of what the kick sounds like in their minds. And same thing with this part here, this kind of kick style. Sounds and feels away versus that previous track's kick style, and like both of those could have been a target that you achieve perfectly, assuming with whatever given reference you were having in the first place. And it makes it really hard to sort of know what that is, without you telling me. Not that you wouldn't, know to do that in any of these submissions. But yeah, other than that, not much else to say about this track. It is extremely on point. It's doing its loud thing. This part was fun. Did get a little long, like for how these parts didn't totally vary too much, especially this guy. I get the point was to drive it, but like it could have been like a quarter of the length and then more of that, in my opinion. This probably would have gone hard on a show. Okay. Next one up is KS Works Clockwork. Now, this one is an MP3. Here we go. cool beans. I imagine this is designed to have vocals over it, which would probably flow nicely. It's a nice beat. I would have loved doing this, like to have done this well when I was like in like 2003 or 4 when I started, because this is what I wanted to do. This kind of like orchestral hip hoppy thing, and it's pretty on point. It is. My criticisms are minor. In fact, it might not even matter, because the only real thing I like even would just care to point out is that none of the strings or the piano sound like they're in the same room, which like, who cares if you don't care? But if you're interested in making the orchestra sound and or feel more realistic, then you want to pay attention to sort of just like what spaces are they in. Because like this beginning guy, that's close. That is really close in our face there in the room with us. And then all of a sudden, like background, like strings in a big, huge orchestra space. And, you know, plus the piano that we don't even really hear by itself until like... So I would either recommend taking these guys, making them feel as far away as the rest of them, or making the rest of them feel as close as these guys. Because how cool would that be? Like, to feel like a kind of like a in-room quartet thing going on, and like it's the Fury Road soundtrack or something. That kind of tone would probably work wonders for this, in my opinion. Part like just. It's already tight enough that like the loss of whatever reverb that's on it, like it could be made up other ways and with other stuff. Either way though, this is fine. Although I will say it is interesting how not full level this is for it to be clipping like this. I would if you're looking to get that hot clipped sound, do that with algorithmic clipping. Like pick a saturation type to put on 0 and let that do its job, as opposed to letting actual clipping clip. Because that's a performance issue on different systems more than it's any kind of a tone consideration. Plus, especially if you're gonna add vocals to this, that'll make it difficult to still feel that way. Not that you probably haven't done that before. I'm sure it's not honestly that much harder. Plus, anyone that likes the beat like this probably wants it to run red, which ain't a bad thing. That would pump hard. Alrighty, here next one is Swelljob, Refulgence Indulgence. Refulgence. Okay. Alright. Okay. Playing the song. I wish you'd used any other kick sample, but other than that, this mix is like perfect. This is exactly. Oh god, it's exactly what I would have done with that kick. And like, it's just because I've heard it so many times, I just don't want it in my life. But no one who knows that or has any interaction with that kick would care because of how excellently you mix this stuff in there. And I'm a real big fan of your filtering, of just the coming in and the out of things and the sweeping up and down and the changing of stuff. Like, it's excellent. It took forever though. This part especially, like, this was fun, but so long. And it was so long at full blast sub too. Like, even though we had light drums, that was interesting because the light drums still hit. Like, your hits. Very good job. And kept putting all together like at the level, the correct level. It's just that this progression could not sustain this length. Is just all about that. Like, this is just so very long for this. But as a platform for stuff, this is awesome. This was a very excellently rendered version of this. And like, this guaranteed to be someone who thinks these tracks, this is great. Like, because there's nothing offensive about it in terms of like listening to it, like pain wise and spectrum presence and whatever. So if there are definitely people who are into progressions this long and windy, I mean, you are. So you've done it. It happened. Good job. Refulgence though. Okay, it's a name. I don't know if I'm ever going to say it right, unless that's how you say it. I'm going to Google that later to see if it's a word. All right. Exoloid. Strong. I know strong's a word. Well then, this was very light. This has sort of like that leveling conundrum I discussed at the very beginning about getting your weights on the important things and stuff like that. Because in this element, like if we're just looking at this as the stuff that's in here, like here's the main lead thing, and like in there somewhere is the kick and the snare, and like the air on them is sort of bigger than they are. Now, this definitely is a texture that definitely existed once upon a time as like our primary pop sound. So I'm not going to say this wasn't someone's intention. I am, however, going to assume that there was a desire to go harder, and that perhaps that in the examples of the idea that you see of the ones that are the hardest you want to go, holy shit, that was a sentence. I imagine that you feel that they are basically this big, wide, and present in the spectrum that you have, but it also has the hit. And how is that possible without destroying all the stuff that you're very carefully created to feel and be this way? And it has to do with how hard everything was clipping and that other stuff. And also all the other junk I was saying about release time editing and whatever. And the reason for that is that in this example of the like sort of carefully balanced idea, the very, very hard tracks are the ones that are like really different, like very different in their level of consideration, where that like, okay, the kick and the snare are like as high as it gets. Like they literally are the up to 0 dB in the moment loudest things in the track. And this is also accomplished through side chaining. I'm assuming that a lot of that's happening here. Like most of the ducking that's happening seems to be just because it's just regular old limiting. But side chaining is where we duck everything except for the things we want to have be loud for a second. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this big, long, expansive thing that you hear sometimes stylistically and stuff that like future bass or whatever. But it could also be extremely targeted and timed. Like if your kick is just this long, then it's only that long. So that only really right in the very beginning is the kick and the snare truly by themselves, if you're side chaining all the way down, to the point where they can actually literally be as loud as physically possible. And then everything follows after that to be a thing that's like so much lower than it that when we eventually come in with the limit like down here, and we crunch everything all down to it, that like we actually aren't disturbing too much of what's down here. In modern times, we do this by not so much making this like, okay, minus 48 dB and like minus 12 dB. Like, no, this stuff is up there. It's just that this is so much more up into the limit, into the master, that relatively speaking, it's minuscule. These two things are like whatever they are, like the lead, the bass, they're so far away. And that's how you get like the previous tracks kind of heavy. That's how you get that blowing away all the stuff, but still preserving how the stuff feels. Like the stuff still is not interacting with the craziness up top because the craziness is exclusively reserved for the things that are loud enough to trigger it, which should only be the incredibly loud elements that are like the main things, the kicks and snares, or maybe a bass or a lead or something that you want to also like cut through on stuff. But it's very carefully like mixed in and structured like plucks on stuff. They don't got to be up there. They can be part of this lower thing so that when they get brought up, they're still basically the same relative mix. Isn't that interesting? It is a very careful balance. It's a very weird selection of like, cool, we're destroying the crap out of some stuff, but we're also doing it with like very calculated, not so much like literal level, but like, okay, what are the things that are being put up into it? So that like, yeah, cool, it's distorting, but only for the length of time this kick is up there doing it, which makes the trash that it turns the stuff into. Because yeah, it's not like only the kick is distorting; it's distorting everything that gets up there at the time that it gets up there. But if it only happens during the length of the thing that's doing it, then it feels like that crunch that happens is just part of the sound. It's part of the kick that's doing it. And then it goes away when the kick goes away. So it's this big old illusion that like that all this destruction that just happened and everything was limited to just that one sound. And but that's what makes it feel like the rest of the stuff is very clean and untouched, despite, it's not really. But that's sort of how that works. That's how you go from something like this, which is a very meticulously, nicely done sort of stacked mix on stuff, and you go and turn it into one of those electro masters, like loud masters. Like that's sort of how those go. Anywho, that was today's list of tracks. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.